Hi, this is Brad with chronicallyhuman.co. This morning I just wanted to talk about Bitcoin and banking for a moment. I used to be a personal banker for about 13 years with a local community bank. And for the first 11 to 12 years, it was a community bank. It had been serving the local area for a long time, for about 50 years, until 2007. When the financial crisis happened. And the bank was still paying its bills. Of course, it had bad loans on the books, but every bank did. They were actually denied TARP money. If you remember back then, during the bank bailouts, TARP was the money that the government was giving out to troubled banks to help them get through the tough times. And our bank was denied. And the FDIC actually found a buyer for the bank. And so instead of letting the bank continue to pay its bills and survive until things started to pick back up, it was bought out by a bank that was bankrolled by a venture capital group out of New York. And if you haven't worked at a bank and been through a bank takeover, it's absolutely horrific. You have people from the government with guns that come in and tell everybody to stop. And then they go through everything. They count everything. And you have state troopers there to make sure that the transition goes well. And it's very, there's a threat of violence there. And it didn't go well. It didn't take me long after the new bank took over to want to do something else. And during the same time frame, I was into Bitcoin. In 2013-14, I started really looking into it and saw it as a great alternative to banking. Because once you're inside of the banking system, you see all the regulations. You see the requirements of bank employees to basically spy on their customers for the government. And if you've ever heard of a CTR report, a cash transaction report, or a suspicious activity report, a SAR, then you know that people are looking at your bank accounts constantly to see what you're up to. Every debit card transaction you make, every credit card transaction you make is documented and visible, not only to the bank, but also to the government. So during this time while I was at this community bank, I had time to do a lot of reading. It was a great job. I enjoyed it. And I read about freedom. I read about individual liberty. I read about the true nature of government. And that led me directly to Bitcoin. And what led the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, to create Bitcoin was the financial crisis. In fact, the first Genesis block, which was mined on January 3rd, 2009, contains a copy of the newspaper, the Financial Times. And the copy he chose has the headline. It says, "Chancellor considers second bank bailout." And so Satoshi Nakamoto was very concerned about individual liberty. Nobody actually knows who he is. We just know him through his white paper, which he detailed how to create Bitcoin. And he was very concerned about the control government had over money, about the bank bailouts. As you remember, the bank bailouts were extremely unpopular when they occurred in 2007. In fact, Congress voted against them the first time. But you had the Secretary of Treasury, you had the head of the Federal Reserve say everything's going to fall apart if we don't bail out the system. But they didn't bail out everybody. They didn't bail out the bank that I worked in. And that caused an enormous amount of financial loss for a small community. And it was devastating to people. And not only that, when the new bank took over, they started cutting everything. And it was actually horrific. The whole process was terrible. And that's what's beautiful about Bitcoin. You can't bail out Bitcoin because it's not created by any government. It doesn't require any financial institution. Everybody can be their own bank. So anybody who has a smartphone who buys Bitcoin can send money around the world, pretty much instantaneously for pennies. And I know there's issues with transaction times and delays and fees, but that's going to get all sorted out. There's a lot of new technologies coming on board that are going to make it a lot more frictionless. And if you look at the current banking system, I unfortunately still bank at where I worked, and I just went to go do a payment on a credit card, and the payment is due on the 15th. Well, guess what? The 15th hits on a weekend, and they don't process payments on the weekend. Isn't that convenient, right? And so they charge $9.95 to send that money today. Now, people complain about Bitcoin's fees, but that is actually criminal to charge that in order to send ones and zeros over the internet. And Bitcoin is an alternative to this Federal Reserve US dollar system. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of it because of the price increase. But I think that more and more people are going to become aware of the underlying technology and how it's going to, if it hasn't already, revolutionize the way people think about money. And it's going to change the way we bank. It's going to change not only that, but it's going to change how we view government as well. Because before Bitcoin, you didn't have an alternative to the Federal Reserve US dollar system. And it was assumed that you needed to have a government and a central bank to issue currency and to monitor who uses that and have permission to store it somewhere at a bank, because a bank doesn't just let you come in and open an account. Bitcoin's the opposite of that. You can go anywhere in the world. If you have access to the internet, you can buy Bitcoin. You don't have any of these old gatekeepers and authorities and top-down people telling you what you can and can't do. And that is why Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies are revolutionizing banking and society itself. If you think the internet was a huge innovation, wait until the majority of people understand that they can exit from the Federal Reserve US dollar system into a currency that's not used to punish countries around the world, that's not used to fund massive wars against people around the world, that's not used to lock up people, it's not used to build prisons, it's not used to build weapons and bombs. And you're going to see a revolution in politics that's even more profound and more powerful than what Bitcoin is going to do for money.